Salvis Search for the Universe, Chapter 10, Part 1. Blues, greens, reds and yellows. Colors, colors. Swirling colors, spinning colors. Kaleidoscopic vision, swirling and engaging across the canvas behind the eye, ever changing. Inky blot cascaded, playing patterns, coalescing and breaking. They swam and swam in the sea of light. There was no self, but colors. Colors grew and clung like glue. Mottled figures began to form. The colors faded to grey. Lines span across the vision, fussy lined like fox tails, yet blotted like eyeing an artist's sketch through warped lenses. Slowly, images began to form. Rustling figures, stretching tall, swaying this way or that, reaching the dome above with many-fingered hands, but could not touch the flowing shapes beyond, drifting like lumps of wool in sapphire seas. Beyond even that was the disk, the great disk that blazed like the birth of the universe, hurling its spears of light, punching through the wool and conical giant to pierce the canvas of his sight. Who was he? Was he dead? Thoughts swam through his skull, like feathers in a squall, as he clasped desperately, trying to catch even one, but those he caught could only flow through his fingers like water. The images sharpened. He caught a thought, and it stuck. Those were trees and clouds. His name was Felix. No, that wasn't right. His name was Brandlecop, no, it was Brandlecop, of course. It flowed back, slow, as sucking from a leaking crack in the fountain of knowledge. Somewhere in his recollection, he remembered his body. There was no feeling, but a glow that seemed to buzz around his skin, as if his body was an empty man-shaped bag, just faint enough to recall its shape. He was alive. His eyes rolled up. He saw the cliff and the precipice above. Upturned dirt ran down the slope in an enormous skid mark, barreling through bush and tree in one path of destruction. It looked like a mile of steep slope, grown by the Creator himself to send any hapless hiker tumbling helplessly down and pitch them over the cliff at the bottom. He looked at the cliff again. It must have been over 40 feet tall. How was he still alive? Limbs littered the ground below the cliff. Somewhere in the returning memory, he recalled a phrase that went something like, falling out of the ugly tree and hitting every branch on the way down. It wasn't a perfect fit, but it was the best he could come up with, considering the head trauma. He strained his neck to move. He couldn't feel anything. He couldn't feel anything. His thoughts were back, and he was horrified. Desperately, he begged his motionless limbs to move, but they did not. His heart beat like a drum. Panic squeezed his throat closed. He tried, and tried, and it moved. His foot moved. His relief was indescribable. The feeling was starting to return. He moved again. Yes, the feeling was coming back. The feeling was coming back. Oh God! The feeling was coming back. Oh God! He could feel everything. He groaned like a dying elk. He passed out twice from the pain and woke some indeterminate amount of time later. Something was staring at him. A burst of panic shut up his chest before he remembered it was just a kobold he had been travelling with. Salvi or whatever.
It's okay.
Of course I'm not okay, you squamish imbecile! Is what he wanted to say, but he could only groan and squirm.
Not look okay.
How terribly observant of you! His mind rebutted. What were kobolds made of? She looked scraped and battered, but was up and walking like she had only tripped into a hedge, instead of over a cliff. He forced himself onto his elbows, and had the first opportunity to see the sorry state of his suit. Branches and leaves plugged all the ribboned holes. It was torn and tattered, as if a lion had used it for a scratching post. His beautiful suit! Ruined! Salvis circled around as he worked himself into a sitting position. Everything still hurt, but not quite as bad as it once did. Presumably because his brain had simply given up. He didn't have a mirror, but if he did, he would probably describe his appearance as looking like he had gotten out of a bad fight with some shrubbery.
It beats being eaten by a bear, I suppose.
He groaned. At least his sense of humour was still unscratched. He tried to get up, but was struck down by searing pain as soon as he put weight on his right leg. He yelped and fell on his backside. Salvi tilted her head at him.
My leg! It's broken! It's broken!
He swooned, moaning at inhumanity. Salvi looked at it and seemed unimpressed.
Not look broken?
And what do you know about that? It's probably a hairline fracture or something. Oh! Lost in the wilderness, and I can't even walk. It's hopeless. We're doomed. We're going to be eaten by some kind of... He screamed. What are you doing? He screeched, slapping away Salvi's palpating hands. Or he tried. Lacking the strength, he merely brushed her arms aggressively. So she kept squeezing up and down his legs, as his face contorted into an assortment of expressions that might be carved into wood to scare children on some faraway island.
Not broken,
she declared with a wit of humour, like a mother telling their child that there definitely weren't any monsters under their bed, and they were simply overreacting.
So, you're playing doctor? I'm sorry, I thought you were playing torturer, and doing a bloody fine job at it too. Not that I don't trust your opinion, but I'm afraid I don't trust your opinion.
Salvi looked at him with a confused smile, as she struggled to understand the layers of sarcasm he was operating on.
Not broken,
was all she could say in reply, as if he hadn't heard her the first time.
Well, if it's not broken, then why can't I bloody stand on it then? No, wait!
He fell back as Salvi squeezed around his foot and ankle, gargling a flood of gibberish that might have been obscenities.
Foot not broken,
she declared.
Foot,
She didn't quite grasp it.
What not broken but still bad hurt? Sprained?
He asked, eyes to the sky.
Sprained!
She repeated, not that she just recalled something once learned, because she had never heard the term before in her life, but more like it just sounded like it was the right term. She always went with her gut instincts when it came to things like this.
Okay, so my foot is sprained. That doesn't change that I can't bloody walk. We're still stuck in this bleeding forest, and the closest road I know of is a mile up a bloody bleeding cliff. We're doomed. We're doomed.
He laughed hysterically, biting at his fingernails. Salvi just rolled her eyes. He was obviously overreacting. What was so bad about being away from the path? She got lost all the time, and it always worked out in the end. Braum trod down the path, behind 200 soldiers and 400 followers. It was raining now. His feet hurt, his groin hurt, he was tired, he was miserable. The ointment had helped, but one day of rest was simply not enough. And now he was being conscripted into this harebrained squad to chase after some kobold. It was quite the coincidence, considering he had met a kobold just the other day. He had briefly considered that they might be the same kobold, but that was just ridiculous. What kind of hardened criminal infiltrator gets drunk with a bunch of city guards and then proceeds to fall asleep in the same bed with one of them, literally laying themselves bare, and not sleeping with, mind you? He had spent a lot of time thinking about that night, or rather, morning, seeing as he hardly remembered any of the night before. It was obviously because he was single and hadn't had any action in years, and, considering he was only 26, was quite a problem indeed. Really, he should just let Gawain bring him to a brothel. He was just desperate. That was why he kept thinking about naked kobolds. That was it. He really should be thinking about other things, like how Carlos was currently recovering from wounds that should have been fatal, after that run-in with the very same people they were chasing after. But as clumsy as he was, Braum couldn't imagine him dying of anything short of a ballista bolt to the face. His skin was like leather, and whenever he got drunk, he asked people to smash things over his head. Had he done that when they went out last? He couldn't remember. Several days had passed since leaving Luhorn, without much to show for it. He wondered why he bothered dragging him along on this campaign against two thieves. He was the night watch. Their excuse was that he needed good people to keep watch at night, but forgot the part where his ability to keep watch at night came directly from his ability to sleep all day. So now here he was, being forced to march at what felt like 4 in the morning for most people, and keeping the third of the night shift too. Things really could not get any worse. It should have been an honour to be chosen by Sir Tybalt. It was an excellent opportunity for a promotion, but his groin and sleep deprivation kept him from considering any part of this situation to be anywhere near positive. "Albert?" he asked the person marching in front. He'd never met a man until a few days ago, but he quickly realized that he rather liked him.
"What?
You think anyone slept with a kobold before?"
I'm sure someone somewhere has. Why ask? Are you interested or something?"
he asked jokingly.
No, of course not,"
he said defensively. "I was just thinking, those two we're after, they say the kobolds are female, right? Maybe they're lovers of something." Braum couldn't see it, but Albert was making one of those "what in the world are you talking about" kind of faces.
"Who knows, though? Guess it might be more common than I thought."
"What do you mean by that?"
"I just remembered that there's this brothel in the country to the west that's full of different races. Heard that it's run by a elf maiden, and you can buy her time if you got a mountain of gold. I bet kobolds are somewhere in there. Real den of degeneracy. But suppose that's what those libidinous nonsense over there love."
"Really? An elf?"
"Yeah, can you imagine? They say some king went there one time and ended up trading away his entire kingdom for more and more time with her. Drive you crazy, she will. Though, it's just a rumour. I bet it's worth every coin, though. I'd imagine the real danger is when you're done and you need to go back to whatever hag passes for your wife. Just the other day..."
He trailed off as a horse came galloping in the distance.
"Well, looky here."
The horse stopped beside the company. Tybalt trotted forward in his caparisoned horse to meet them and exchanged soundless words. Eventually the word spread around the entire group. Nothing. They rode all the way to Gribach and had found no trace of the pair. It should have been obvious from the start, seeing as they were allegedly on foot and would have been overtaken by horses within a day of sighting. They had gone off the path somewhere, possibly in the other direction. Likely appearing on this path was nothing more than a ploy to throw them off. It would be up to the scouts now. As they marched, several bands of scouts were combing the countryside, looking for any trace of the two. Several of the excursions had been false leads, hunting parties and villagers hunting for herbs and mushrooms. But one of them would certainly turn up gold. They were not legendary warlocks who could vanish with one word from their mouth. They were a human and a kobold. There had to be a trace of them somewhere. One of the more interesting findings had been the massive skid mark down a slope and over a cliff. But it was probably some unfortunate travellers instead. Deadly skilled infiltrators didn't simply fall over cliffs and drop to their deaths. It was far too anticlimactic. More likely some villager had fallen over. Identifying whatever corpse was down there was important for the sake of the ledgers, but considering the current situation, it had been put far, far down the to-do list. Whatever the case, Brown sighed in relief at a brief stop to hear the scout's report. He hoped they found them soon, for he feared he might wear his crotch down to the bone.
So hungry,
Brandlecoff moaned, sitting in the nook of a craggy overhang, water pouring from the sky outside.
So thirsty.
It was clammy, cold and damp. He shuffled to the mouth of the shelter and licked the rivulets running down the stone. It was the best he could do. How many days had it been? 4? 5? It hardly seemed like it mattered. He was going to die here, stranded in the wilderness. The water tasted like iron and rock. His stomach felt hollow, and he was pretty sure he could feel his body eating itself. For the first time in his life, he regretted being skinny. If he had been as plump as his old chef, he probably could have lasted months out here without eating anything. He shouldn't have remembered his chef. Visions of finely roasted poultry and spiced soup swarmed his head. His stomach growled louder than before. He could not walk, so he spent the past several days trying to learn how to start a fire. He thought it involved something about rubbing 2 sticks together, but no matter how hard he tried, he just ended up with sore arms. He hadn't tried in several hours. He was afraid he couldn't afford to waste any more energy. He grabbed his lute and strung a sad, sad tune, very, very poorly.
This forest sure is dark.
The boy's gaze flitted nervously. Quit your belly aching. Tain't much out here to get ya in this forest. It's about time ya learn to hunt. Sus, I'm bringing ya to hunt. A strong bow hung over his shoulder, and several arrows stuck out from his quiver like quills.
But are there monsters?
Monsters? Pah! He laughed. Been listening to too many of your mom's stories, boy. Ta ain't no monsters in here. Been walking these forests since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Worst I've seen are some quillhogs and timber wolves.
Wolves!
He squeaked. His father laughed again. Aye, they be wolves. Rare to see 'em around here, but they be up and about from time to time. Last I've seen 'em was last winter. Tain't too active this time of year, so's you can settle down. The boy didn't look convinced. He shook and quivered, twiddling his fingers. His father smoothed the crown of his head with an enormous hand, ruffling his hair so hard his neck turned like it was spinning on a top. Don't remember raising ya to be such a lily-livered whiff. You're a man, ain't ya? Time ya start acting it. Just think how proud your mum will be when ya bring back your first buck. The boy pouted, but there was an incessant spark of manly pride in his defiant expression. They walked for some time. It was sprinkling, but that was no reason to call off the hunt. What was getting wet compared to getting to eat? If un looking for something tougher, it would be the Jupinwek.
Jupinwek?
Aye, he said gravely, playing his part in the age-old activity of scaring your son.
Terrible things, stealing men's soul they do. Their limbs be thin and twisted like old gnarl-bark trees. They can clear 5 man strides in one bound, and they faces be like elk skulls, except covered in veins and dripping God knows what. Grow a horn for every soul they steal, they do.
At this point, the boy's eyes were wide, and his skin a pasty white.
You know one's close by, the sound.
Never seen one myself, but my grandpappy did when he was just a little boy younger than me. It played a tune, something out of this world. Draws you in, it does. The boy swallowed.
We won't see one of those, right?
His father blew off his serious expression and burst into a laugh.
They're a myth, boy. Old Grandpa was already a few sheep short of a flock when he claimed to have seen one.
The boy puffed up. He had been seriously afraid. He stomped ahead, 1, 2 steps, then slowed, stopped. In the lull of conversation, he heard something faint, whispering through the trees. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Discordant, harsh, it bypassed the ears and drilled straight into the brain. It was otherworldly, unholy. Chills ran up his spine, icy as lich breath.
What in the...
His father trailed off, stepping further, heading to investigate a horrible, horrible noise. The boy stepped behind, stiff leg, and his soul in his throat. And then he realized something.
It's the Yippee-Wack!
He screamed. His father looked at him, but kept walking. The son pulled him back.
It's dragging you in! Can't you see?
They're a myth, son. They can't be. The horrid noise grew louder, more intense. Its perverted tune thrum in time with his heart. The whole forest fled with malice, angered they had found out. The father gasped in shock, turning around, tripping on his own feet and scrambling up. He ran away, away from that demonic tune. His son struggled to keep up, and they ran and ran, straight to their village without rest.